Hi, and welcome back to another tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to use the criteria approach in SoFi. Once you're past the exploratory stage of your PMF analysis, meaning that you've looked at individual PMF runs to understand what a reasonable solution looks like, the next step is to check the robustness of your solution. To do that, you start running PMF many times, and you also combine this with either the bootstrap resampling strategy or also the input perturbation to help you assess the statistical stability of your solution. With that, you end up easily with hundreds or even thousands of PMF runs, and the same also goes for when you start running rolling PMF. At this point, you can simply not go through everything manually anymore. So instead, you need to start defining a set of criteria that describe what you consider a good PMF solution, and then let SoFi apply these criteria automatically across all your runs. And then you can filter out all the PMF runs that don't meet your requirements. That way, you end up with a subset of PMF runs that are actually meaningful and reliable. Okay, so let's dive in and let me show you how to do this. So what I have here is a very small example where I have some offline HR AMS data and I run PMF 100 times with Bootstrap enabled. First thing you want to do is you want to change here from manual choice to automated selection. And then this button here becomes available and you can open the PMF criteria panel. The list of criteria is highly individual and will be different for every data set. So what I'm going to show you here is just how to write criteria, but it will not be a full-on ready to use for everybody list. So quick information of what PMF solution I have here. I have a 6-factor PMF solution. I constrained the first factor to be a sulfur-containing factor. I know that I have a nitrogen-containing factor, a biomass-burning factor, a primary biological factor, and then a winter and a summer OA factor. So for example, I want to make sure now that my constraint really worked, and I want to have my key sulfur ion for that factor really being explained by this first factor. So I want to look into the explained variation of that ion. So I go here to time series, select here explained variation, and then choose my ion, which is this here, CH3SO2 in factor 1. And with this, I give SoFi the command that it should check for the explained variation of that ion in factor 1. Next, I want my nitrogen containing factor to be my second factor. And for this, I want the highest fraction of my key ion C5H10M in that factor. So I don't go via the explained variation this time, but I go here now for variable of solution. Select here factor 2 and my nitrogen key ion. I want it to be highest in fraction in that factor, so I select here fraction. And then write it also into the list. And now SoFi will be checking factor 2 for C5H10M fraction-wise. Next, I want my BBA factor to be in factor 3. And I have for this data set here quite some external measurements. So I want my BBA factor to correlate with my external level glucosan measurements. So for that, I select here a correlation. I want an R Pearson correlation of my solution, my factor 3, with my external data, level glucosan. Let's go that with absolute values here. And I just write this now in my criteria list. So now SoFi will correlate factor 3 with my level glucosan measurements. So this is good and everything, but I also want to make sure that my profile does have a reasonable signal at MZ60, the level glucosan. So I go back here to average. And since I'm looking into the profile now, I change here from time series to profile. And I wanted to look into my solution. And I want to look into my factor 3, the MZ60. So here the level glucosan. So I write this into the list as well. With this, SoFi not only checks now the third factor for the correlation with level glucosan, but also looks into the profile of the third factor and checks the intensity of C2H4O2. Up next, I have my primary biological factor, and I'm going to do something similar as with my biomass burning factor. So first of all, I want to look into the correlation. So I select here R. Pearson of the time series of my factor 4 and my external measurement of MBTCA. So I write this into my list. Up next, I want SoFi to monitor my ratio of F61 to F44. For that, I go back to average here. I stay in time series, but now I want to look at my F61 in factor 4. So I select here variable of solution and find my factor for 61. Now at the moment, SoFi will just look at C2H5O2 in factor 4, but I said I want it as a ratio compared to F44. So I can just type in here the equation. So now I can either select my F44 in the drop-down menu again, or make it a bit easier, I just copy paste my factor for C2H5O2 and change that to factor for CO2 and hit enter. Just make sure when you do it manually that you have a space before the keyword and an apostrophe at the end of the keyword. So at the moment, SoFi will check the ratio of 61 to 44, but at the moment it's still in absolute values, but I want to look at the fraction. So I go over here, change it to fraction, and now you just write that into the list again. And now SoFi will monitor for factor 4 the correlation of that factor with MBTCA and also calculate the ratio of 61 to 44. So all I have left now is my OAs, and I don't have the easiest data set here regarding the OAs because with most OAs you can just distinguish between more and less oxidized OA, so you can just use the fraction of 44 or the ratio of 44 to 43 as a criteria to distinguish them. Here it's a bit more complicated because I have them season-wise. What you can do here is that you have your winter OOA in factor 5. So let's say we go factor 5. We look at the CO2 to be highest, but not over the whole time, but over just the winter months. So we select here only the winter months and write this as a criteria here. So you see it's going to be highlighted in bold. That means that you have selected a sub data set of your whole solution. And we can do the same also for factor 6. And there only select the warm months. So what we have here now, let's write that, is a list of 8 criteria. Keep in mind that this is now an example for this very specific data set. When you define your own list of criteria, try to think of how can I translate what I recognize as a factor in something measurable. Defining a suitable list of criteria will involve quite some going back and forth until you find something that really fits and describes your solution well. There are also a few more criteria options that I did not show you yet. One thing is if you have a highly time-resolved measurement and you have a factor that you can easily identify just by the diurnal pattern, something like a cooking factor where you have a lunch peak, you can also use this lunch peak as a criterion. Let me show you now, just as an example of how to do this. You go here, you're still in time series, you go here to this option hours. Let's say that we have our lunch peak over the hours 12 and 1. So we go here and we select now the hours. So let's say that we have our cooking factor in factor 1. So we take 12 and 13 and we want the average of that. So we write this as an equation. So now we sum up factor 1, the hour 12 and the hour 13. Divide that by 2. So what we define now is that we check for the intensity of the hours 12 and 13, but we do not know yet whether it's a peak or not. So we need to compare it to some period where we don't expect any cooking at all. So for example, the hours 7 and 8. So let's do that. We compare our average over the lunch hours to the hours where we don't expect any lunch. Let me copy paste that, it's the fastest. So we said we don't expect any cooking emissions at the hours 8 and 9. And so this would be our criteria for the lunch peak now. We have the average value over the lunch peak compared to the average value where you don't expect any cooking, and that ratio can then be used to define whether you have a lunch peak or not. SoFi has even more options on how to define a criterion. First of all, over here we also have the option to use externals, variables, or any kind of the residual as a criterion. Then over here we also have different types of criteria. Here we have the average. The average is what we used before, where you have an average score value per PMF run, and you can actually combine those with mathematical expressions like we did before to define the lunch hour peak. Next we have a sum criteria where the final score value is the sum of the final wave, and it can be used, for example, for the C-value approach when you want to compare the overlap of the histograms. If you want to have a look on how to set up this criterion, please consult the manual. We also have the option for multilinear regressions, where you have the option to have a multilinear regression between any sum of the factors and some external measurements. And then we have here a whole bunch of correlations, not just the R Pearson. What we strongly recommend is to use the cosine similarity if you want to compare profiles, because with the cosine similarity you compare the shape of the whole profile and the correlation will not be dominated by some of the highest intensity ions like it would be with the R Pearson. All these criteria are so-called point type criteria, where the final score value is represented in a 2D plot where the user then can select the good PMF runs from. SoFi also has two more options, and one being the image type criteria, the other the movie type criteria. So with the image type criteria, you will have one additional dimension. So the score value will not just be a single point per PMF run, but actually of the wave per PMF run. So for example, you could use it to track a profile feature or a diurnal feature over all PMF runs. Then we have the movie criteria, where we have one more additional dimension where you can actually scroll through the different PMF runs and select or inspect even more carefully certain features. For both of those types, you can see some examples in the manual. Coming back to our list of the 8 criteria, we are now ready to start evaluating that list. So evaluating means that SoFi is going to calculate a score. But if we do this right now, we have a big problem, and that is that when you run PMF, the factors will appear in a random order unless they are constrained. And I have here only one constrained factor, so I only know that my sulfur containing factor will be in position 1. All the others can appear in a random position. So you can use the criteria not only to select or calculate a score and then select whether the run is good or bad, but you also need to use them to sort unconstrained factors. So for that, you can select one criteria per factor to be used as a sorting criteria. This is rather simple to do. You just click here on the criterion part and you see the criteria that will be used for sorting highlighted. You can use Control or Shift to also highlight the criteria for all the different factors. So let's go here. Let's use the correlation for factor 3 and 4. And then let's use also the 44 and factor 5 for during winter months. What we recommend is to sort all factors except one, so that SoFi has some freedom to rearrange the factors, and that often leads to a faster and better result. Once you've defined all your necessary criteria and you've selected all the criteria that you need for sorting, you can start evaluating the list. The criteria approach in SoFi is built around the idea of a score value, which means that each factor in the PMF run gets a score based on how well it meets the criteria that you defined, and the higher the score, the better the match with the criteria. To make the sorting fair, SoFi also normalizes the score so that each category of criteria has equal weight. SoFi uses the Hungarian sorting algorithm, and what this algorithm does is to find the combination of factors that gives the highest overall score, which then represent the best sorted PMF solution. Now there is one more thing. If you want to look at the next best scoring solution, you have to check this box here to also be able to see those scores in the next evaluation step. There is one more thing. Each criterion has this little checkbox here, and SoFi will evaluate all the criteria that have this box checked. So if you have already evaluated a list of criteria and you have some additional criteria that you also want to evaluate, you can unselect those criteria that have already been evaluated to save some time. Just keep in mind, if you want to use some additional criteria for sorting, that you check all the criteria that should be used for the sorting, otherwise SoFi will do the sorting wrongly. And with this, let's start the evaluation of the criteria list. In the next tutorial, I will show you how to select the environmentally reasonable PMF solutions based on the score values that we are now evaluating. Thank you for watching this tutorial and see you soon.